All right, so we're diving into this situation between the U.S. and Colombia. Things got a little heated over deportation flights, and we're going to try to figure out exactly what went down and why it matters, especially to you.
Yeah.
You sent over the CNN article, so clearly you're already following this story. So we're going to kind of like break it down and pull out the insights that maybe you haven't thought of.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? This wasn't just like a little disagreement or a little back and forth. It like blew up really fast.
Yeah.
Became like a full-blown diplomatic standoff practically overnight.
Yeah, it really did escalate. It
Yeah.
escalated very fast. It all started when the Colombian president, Gustavo Petro, refused to let two U.S. military planes carrying deported migrants land in Colombia. He insisted on better treatment for those being deported, but he did say that he was open to receiving them on civilian flights.
Right. And that seemingly small act,
Mm-hmm.
like of blocking those planes was a really calculated move. And there's a lot of historical baggage there.
Yeah.
Petro is signaling that he's not going to just accept the way that the U.S. has historically handled deportations. And it's really a demonstration of, kind of shifting power dynamics in the region.
And he didn't just talk about it, he actually went through with it. Colombian officials initially authorized these flights, and then Petro just kind of pulled the rug out from under everyone, and it created this like very public and very tense situation.
It definitely got the attention of the Trump administration.
Oh, yeah.
Their response was swift and strong.
They came out swinging.
Yeah.
Trump announced this whole package of sanctions against Colombia, talking like emergency 25% tariffs on all Colombian imports, and that was supposed to jump to 50% within a week.
Wow.
A travel ban on Colombian citizens, visa revocations for Colombian officials and their supporters, stricter inspections on all their cargo shipments, and they even slapped on banking and finance sanctions.
Just to put this in perspective, these actions are basically unheard of, especially given that this is like the first week of Trump's second term.
Right.
Historically, the U.S. has used economic pressure like tariffs on countries like China. But to unleash this on a country like Colombia,
Yeah.
and so rapidly, it sends a very clear message about how important controlling immigration is to this administration. They're not tolerating any pushback.
And Petro didn't back down at all. He met that aggression head on with like a mix of defiance and even some humor. He basically shrugged off the travel ban, suggesting that, he wasn't really keen on visiting the U.S. anyway. And he even took some jabs at Trump's policies and personality.
I think what's really interesting is that, he didn't just make witty comments. He backed them up with action. He countered with a 25% tariff on U.S. imports. And he even invited Americans living in Colombia illegally to regularize their stay, which basically means they could apply for legal residency.
Wow.
He even offered his presidential plane to bring the Colombian deportees back home, under humane conditions, of course.
So it sounds like he's really playing this strategically. He's pushing back against the U.S., but he's also trying to appeal to everyday Americans and highlight the humanitarian side of this issue.
That's a good observation. He is appealing to the American public, many of whom might not agree with these pretty extreme measures. He's painting a picture of himself as, the more reasonable one who's advocating for humane treatment of migrants.
Yeah. So we have this clash of personalities, and policies, but there's a bigger story here, right? The CNN article highlighted the fact that using military aircraft for deportation, this was like a brand new tactic from the U.S.
Right.
It seems like they were really trying to make a statement.
Oh, it was definitely a show of force.
Right.
It was meant to be like, hey, we're serious, we're in control. But it seems to have backfired a little. Colombia wasn't the only country that kind of pushed back. We saw similar resistance from Mexico and Brazil. And it suggests that this is like a growing trend in the region. This isn't just about Colombia. It speaks to, I think, a larger shift in how Latin American countries are relating to the U.S.
That's a really important point. This isn't just some random event.
Right.
This is like a sign of bigger changes to come.
Exactly. The fact that multiple countries are challenging the U.S. on immigration policy, it suggests like a potential shift in power dynamics.
Yeah.
We may be seeing the beginning of like a new era in U.S.-Latin American relations.
This whole thing, it raises so many questions, right? Like, what are the economic consequences of this standoff? How will it actually affect, people on both sides of this?
Yeah, well, let's take the economic angle first.
Yeah.
While Colombia isn't like a major U.S. trading partner on the level of, say, China,
Right.
the tariffs will still have an impact. Think about it this way. If you're used to buying Colombian coffee every week,
Yeah.
those tariffs mean that the price of your coffee could go up.
Right.
And that's just one example.
And the CNN article talked about how tariffs, just in general, can lead to inflation, meaning that the prices of all sorts of goods could increase. And it even mentioned the possibility of a trade war. That sounds really serious. What exactly does that mean?
Well, imagine like a back and forth escalation where each country keeps raising tariffs on the other's goods. It can kind of spiral out of control and damage both economies. Think of it like a game of chicken, but with real-world consequences.
Right. Yeah.
Now, someone like Janie Dimon, who's, a pretty powerful figure in finance,
Yeah.
might argue that tariffs are a necessary tool to protect national security,
Right.
even if it means a little inflation. But for the most part, economists tend to view tariffs negatively. They disrupt trade, they raise prices for consumers, and they can ultimately hurt everyone involved.
So there's the economic fallout, but we can't forget about, the human element here. These aren't just like abstract policies. They affect real people.
Right.
Brazil actually condemned the U.S. for how they treated Brazilian deportees on those military flights. They called the conditions degrading, describing things like handcuffs, chains, a poorly maintained aircraft with broken air conditioning. It's like a stark reminder of the human cost of these policies.
And that brings up a crucial ethical question, right? Is it ever justifiable to use military aircraft for deportations?
Yeah.
You know, it sends a very harsh message, almost as if these individuals are like enemy combatants or something.
Right.
That seems like a very disproportionate response, and it raises concerns about, how we view and treat migrants.
It's a really powerful point. We need to remember that behind all this, the political maneuvering and the economic arguments, there are real people whose lives are, being directly impacted by these decisions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not just about, the individuals being deported. This situation could have ripple effects throughout the entire region,
Yeah.
Impacting diplomatic relations and potentially creating instability.
So where does this leave us? What's the takeaway for someone, like you who's following this story closely?
I think the key takeaway here is that this is a pivotal moment. What started as, a dispute over deportation flights
Hmm.
has exposed some, deeper tensions. And it could be a turning point in U.S.-Latin American relations. We need to watch closely how this unfolds.
Okay, so let's kind of zoom out and connect the dots here.
Yeah.
We started with Petro, refusing to let those U.S. military planes land, and that just sparked this whole chain reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Then we had Trump's aggressive retaliation with all those sanctions, and then Petro firing back with his own set of countermeasures.
Yeah,
Like a high-stakes game of chess.
it is.
And it's hard to say, who's going to make the next move.
Right.
And while this might seem like just a political squabble, it really highlights how the dynamics in the region are changing. Other countries are pushing back against U.S. policies, and it really raises questions about the future of, U.S. influence in Latin America. We've covered the economic consequences of these tariffs and, the potential for an all-out trade war that could hurt, pretty much everyone involved. We've also talked about the human cost of these policies and the ethical questions surrounding the use of military aircraft for deportation. But what does this all mean looking ahead? What should we be paying attention to as this story, keeps developing?
Here's something to consider, right? Could this be the start of a more assertive stance from Latin American countries? Will we see more pushback, against U.S. demands, or will the U.S. just double down on its approach, leading to, even more tensions and potential instability?
Those are some pretty big questions, and I don't envy anyone trying to answer them right now, but one thing is for sure, this whole situation really underscores the need for open dialogue and a deeper understanding of the complexities involved and, a commitment to finding solutions that address both security concerns and the human rights of everyone involved.
I completely agree. It's easy to, get caught up in the back and forth, but we need to remember there are actual human lives at stake here. Finding humane and sustainable solutions to the challenges of migration, that should be the ultimate goal.
Well, this has been a truly fascinating deep dive into, a really complex and evolving issue. We hope you've gotten some valuable insights and a better understanding of, what's at stake here. Thanks for joining us.